Every week that this current series goes by, I think to myself, yay, I get to preach about somebody in the Bible who had their act together and had it all together, and it doesn't look like it's going to happen. Every single one of these characters is so messed up, I can't even believe it. But just as an aside, just to bring us into this, I want to tell you that most of my colleagues, when I talk to them about the business of or the activity of being part of leadership in a local church, most of them, the one thing that they don't like is meetings. So there's something wrong with me because I love meetings. Like just recently we had and here's one of the reasons why. Sometimes amazing things happen in meetings. Recently we had a leadership team meeting for the folks who lead in this church, who I like to call my bosses. And we were actually sitting around the table together. It's always, believe it or not, I always look forward to this. I do. It's usually on an early Saturday morning, and we all get together and we share what's going on in our lives as well, but we talk about what it takes to sort of make the church go. So we're having this meeting, and this last time, the most amazing thing happened. Right in the middle of the meeting, this angel appeared in the middle of the room. This you're looking like you don't believe this is a true story. So this angel is standing there on the table in the middle of the room. And the angel turns, looks and smiles at everybody. And the angel turns and looks at me and says, Peter, you, just like Solomon, I am going to give you a choice. I'm going to give you whatever you ask. You can ask for long and healthy life. You can ask for all the money in the world, or you can ask for a discerning heart, for wisdom. And I said, just like King Solomon, I am going to ask for wisdom. I would like great wisdom. And then the angel said, your wish is granted, and disappeared. And here's how I know I got wisdom. Because I turned to everybody at the table and I said, I should have asked for the money. There's a difference between wisdom and knowledge. And no offense to my young person in the room, you don't actually learn the difference between these two things until you're old enough to have wisdom. Can I get an amen? So I like to say that wisdom is usually the kind of thing that you earn through experience. Do you understand? I mean, this is the kind of thing where because of the hard lessons in life, you've learned by experience how things work or how they don't work. Knowledge would be more like looking something up on Wikipedia and memorizing a few dates or a few facts. Wisdom would be where it's ingrained into you. I thought of a great example of this, and this is sort of like a musical example for those of you who love music. There's different levels to loving music. Like, for instance, if you love music, you know that Beethoven's Ninth is the greatest symphony ever written. And if you don't believe that, then you're just wrong. But that's not my opinion. That's objective fact, right? So if you hear the first few notes of a Beethoven symphony, dun 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 dun, 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 dun. A small amount of knowledge would say that's something classical. And someone who has a little bit more knowledge would say, oh, I think that's Beethoven. And someone that has just a little bit more knowledge might say, oh, that's Beethoven's Fifth. Somebody with wisdom says, that's Christopher Hogwood's orchestra, and that was recorded in 1987. You see what I mean? There's levels. There's levels. I can throw a ball, but I can't strike out a major leaguer. The other example I love to sort of go is cooking. Now, there's a couple levels to that. I will give you an example. My wife has been a very great cook for a very long time. And it's not that we are subordinate to the traditional gender roles in our house, because my wife works hard too. She just enjoys it and she's good at it. So I do all the cleaning so that she can do all the cooking. Now, on a side note, part of that is someone who does a lot of cooking but someone else cleans after them makes a huge mess of the kitchen. And the person that eats that is like, wow, that's really worth it. I don't mind rinsing and cleaning all those dishes because that was good. But now my wife will look at a recipe, and as she's going through, she might instinctively know, I could use a little more of this in that recipe or a little less of this. And then she'll take that recipe and she'll adjust it on the fly because of wisdom. My son has a certain interest in cooking, and he'll often come home from school, and he will turn on the stove and he'll make something. He'll have found a recipe, and he'll change some of the ingredients. And it doesn't work out that well because my son has what I would call knowledge about how to cook, whereas my wife has wisdom, and I have neither. So what I do is I can do breakfast. I'm really good at breakfast. Or like a few months ago for a special occasion, I made my wife a recipe similar to something we used to have at a restaurant. But I had to get all the instructions off of the internet, and I had to follow them really carefully, and I had to like ask questions, and I had to really work hard to get it right because I have neither. So that's a little bit of the difference between wisdom and knowledge, but there's more to it than that, because there are levels of wisdom, or there are different kinds of wisdom that you find, for instance, in Scripture that are different categories. Now, the first wisdom is the kind of wisdom we're talking about today. And that first wisdom, some wisdom is revealed by God. That's kind of what we're talking about with Solomon. Some wisdom is revealed by God. So here's Solomon. He has, I don't know if his experience was as dramatic as mine in the staff meeting when the angel came. You still don't believe that really happened. Here's Solomon. I want you to understand that Solomon is probably very, very young. Maybe as young as 20 years old. Very young at the time that this occurs. So this dream comes where God speaks to him, and he gives him this choice. He gives them this opportunity to just ask for anything that he wants. Now, sometimes I think we give Solomon too much credit. And here's why. Because I read this story, and as is typical for me when I'm preaching on an Old Testament story, I read it about 100 times during the week, and then I read the scriptures around it, and I look into the character, and I kind of figured some things out on my own that I didn't find in commentaries and such. He's only about 20 years old. And he's basically in his mind, he's got this choice between three things to ask for. One of them is great wealth. He already has great wealth. I don't think he can imagine having more wealth than he has. So it's natural that he didn't ask for that. Another one is long life. Now he figures, I'm the king. I get the best of everything. I'm probably going to live a long time anyway. My father did. I expect I will as well. So wisdom kind of made sense, because his job was a little scary. This job of being king is pretty scary. So Solomon asks for wisdom. And he gets it. He gets this wisdom given to him. And if you go forward in the Bible just a little bit, there's a story about two women who come to the king fighting over a baby. And the one says, okay, here's what happened, king. This woman here, we both had a baby about the same age. She rolled over on the baby in the middle of the night and smothered it and stole my baby. And the other woman says, it was that one. She rolled over and smothered her baby. This is my baby. So Solomon does something that, quite frankly, I think is a little bizarre. He says, okay, I can solve this. No problem. Bring me a sword. I can imagine the women think, what? Okay, here's what we're going to do. Since you both claim this baby, we're just going to cut the baby in two pieces. And you can have one piece and you can have the other. And then one of the women says, no, give the baby to her. And the second woman says, no, cut the baby in two. I'm good with that. Solomon says, give the baby to this woman. His wisdom, that's the one big story we have of his wisdom. But his wisdom is so famous. He gets this great fame throughout the world, and rulers come to visit him just to see what the deal is. So Solomon gets this kind of wisdom from God that is just basically bam. It's like a spiritual gift. Because there's a spiritual gift of wisdom mentioned in the New Testament. And that's where you and I maybe have seen people, certainly not me, who have been believers, followers of Jesus, who you think, how can they figure out, how can they know so much? How do they make such wise decisions? Especially when they're young and they seem to have wisdom. And that can sometimes happen supernaturally as a spiritual gift. And I think that's what we're talking about here. But then we have another kind of wisdom, and this is a wisdom that Solomon eventually was going to acquire, we hope. And that's the wisdom that we learn by doing. Some wisdom happens in the doing. And this is a little bit like skill, like the cooking example that I gave earlier. Now, I'm a bit of a sports fan, but I'm a huge Red Sox fan. And this is a great day to be a huge Red Sox fan, because tonight the Red Sox are going to win the fourth game of the World Series. The fifth game, they're going to win, and they're going to take that trophy home again. And you're shaking your head no, but it's going to happen. It's going to happen. But when I watch some of these guys throw a ball, and years ago I tried to throw a ball, but my eyesight without my glasses is pretty bad. And even with my glasses, I have one nearsighted eye and I have one farsighted eye, and I have astigmatism. I had a lazy eye when I was a kid. So basically, I can't tell how far the ball is when it's coming to me because I don't have the right kind of depth perception. Last time I played catch with my brother, I'm like this, and the ball hits me in the mouth, and it was a mess. It was a mess. So that's not my thing, but as I watch these guys, I remember one particular pitcher years ago who had a talent for throwing balls that were not even anywhere near the strike zone and making people swing at them. So the guy would be at the plate, and this guy would just stare him down. And it was one particular guy, he did it better than anybody else I've ever seen. And he'd throw that ball, and he'd throw balls way outside, but somehow the way that he looked at the guy, he got him to swing the bat at something that was no good. And he was only good at this late in his career because he had wisdom that came by doing. Wisdom that came by doing. Back to the music thing. This is the kind of thing for me as a musician that I think of when I play guitar. When I first learned how to play guitar, I needed not only the chords written out for me, but they have these little diagrams that show the shapes of where your fingers go on the strings. And I needed to have that because I needed to know that this particular position was a D chord and this was a G, but I needed to have the actual drawing. And as I played more and more, I got to the point where if you just tell me what the chord is, I can remember where to put my fingers, even at different places on the neck, and they go in different places as you move up and down. And I figured that out, and then I got to the point, and David is such a great musician that I know that he can feel me on this. If I don't even know what key you're playing in, and I'm playing along with you, you start playing, I only have to hit a couple notes before I know, okay, that's the keys. And I can play along and I can't anticipate what the next chord is going to be without you telling me in many cases. Because as we do and do and do, we acquire wisdom. If you keep reading the story of Solomon, I have some really bad news for you. This doesn't happen with Solomon. Solomon makes some really dumb choices as time goes by. And then there's the final bit of wisdom, which is that some wisdom is naturally acquired. Sometimes we just have it naturally. There are things that we understand. This is a little bit like when people seem like they're born to do something. You know, most of us go through our lives doing something that we've been trained at, that we're good at in terms of our job, and a few of us are fortunate enough to be so good at something that we can do it like nobody else can. When I think of someone like Albert Einstein, which is ironic because he didn't do well in math in school, but he ended up figuring out mysteries of the universe that nobody else could figure out. My favorite example, and this is a little bit like talent. So here's an analogy for this one. I'll go back to sports. Anybody ever heard of a guy named Michael Phelps? I think everybody has. Michael Phelps won, I think it was 23 gold medals in the Olympics. There's like a couple dozen or 3 dozen countries that have won fewer Olympic medals than he has, and he's only one guy. And he was amazing to watch swim. Part of the reason is his body's weird. He's got a wingspan, his arms go wider than his height. His ankles move in a way that ankles aren't supposed to move. And even the ratio of his torso to his legs is weird. So he was actually, God made him, his body in such a way that he was going to be able to learn to do something better than anybody else just because of the way he was made. Another sports one is Usain Bolt. If you ever watched him run, he set a world record while he was making a face at the guy next to him when he crossed. You don't do that. You don't turn your head like that if you want to run faster than everybody else. He broke all the rules because it came easy to him. I think of Mozart. Mozart was writing symphonies before he was 10 years old. And actually some of them sound like a symphony a kid would write, but some of them don't. For all of us, there's probably something innate that you're good at that's related to this kind of what I would call natural wisdom. And I have no idea about Solomon, but I suspect that he did have a lot of natural wisdom because otherwise he would have asked for money. Even though he had it, he would have still asked for more. And I have a feeling that God was like, yeah, you know, you are actually pretty wise for your age, but I'm going to give you some supernatural wisdom. So he kind of strikes me as a person that was a perfect blend of these things. He had a natural wisdom about how to read people, and he had accumulated knowledge growing up in the king's house and then being king for so many years. And then on top of that, he got this supernatural gift of wisdom. And for all of us, we have this combination, maybe not as intense, of our natural gifting, of what we learn as we go, and what supernaturally might be given to us as spiritual gifts because we're children of God who follow Jesus. And I love to think that was enough. And I remember when I was a kid, when I was, even before I was 10 years old, the Bible just fascinated me. The Bible has always fascinated me. And I was reading these stories, and I kind of remember like the first time that you read this story of Solomon, you think, oh, this is going to end great. This guy has got it all together. He grew up in a good house. He learned how to rule the people from his dad, even though his dad kind of messed up. And then he gets this supernatural gift of wisdom. So, boy, he's going to go on in life, and things are just going to go great. I challenge you to read the first book of Kings, because that'll really disabuse you of the notion that when we have everything we need, it necessarily means we make the right decisions as time goes by. This is a man who married, it turns out, 1,000 wives. I know if you do the math, maybe he had dinner with, or whatever, with many of these wives only once, maybe never. Maybe they just became like property. And but it was one thing. And the Bible, it strikes me and it always troubles me. The Bible never says that polygamy is wrong. You can go search for it. The Bible doesn't actually say directly, thou shalt not marry more than one wife. It's never there. But you definitely get the feeling when you read about some of these guys that it's not such a good idea, which is why we don't practice it today. It's one of the many reasons we don't practice it today. But here, Solomon, so by the time of Solomon, I think these people have figured out, one man, one wife, happy life. But he's got 1,000 wives, and that's not enough. Solomon starts to worship the gods of these wives from foreign lands, and I think he makes these marriages to make political alliances. So he's married to all these women because that's how he makes sure that he's not at war with this city or this country or this kingdom by marrying one of the guy's daughters. But now he starts worshiping their gods. I like to wonder what would have happened if Solomon had made better choices. Because right after Solomon, basically, it's over. There's never a good time in the kingdom again. There's maybe 2 guys of all the kings that come after him that are any good at all. And the consequences of Solomon's bad choices end up making all of that happen. So I wonder, because this story was in something called the Narrative Lectionary, which is what I'm following. I find myself wondering, why'd you put this here? Why'd you make me preach about this idiot? And I think, if nothing else, it's to comfort us. As we go through these stories of messed up people in the Bible, okay, Solomon makes a whole lot of bad choices, but eventually God makes something good out of all of it. Eventually God, through the line of succession, brings us, just like I mentioned at the end of last week, God brings us Jesus out of this. And I hate to say it, but I think to myself, it's kind of a comfort because I've never messed up that bad. I've never done these things. I mean, I don't have the opportunity to marry 1,000 women, but I don't think I would if I did. And I don't have the opportunity to rule a nation. But eventually, regardless of the bad choices that we make, as we live in the era of grace, the age of the love and mercy of Jesus, I want to comfort you. Just as redemption for all of us came out of the line of these messed up kings, redemption for the world comes through our faltering and halting following of Jesus. That when we make the unwise choices, God can still redeem that. That God can still, at the end of the day, say, it is going to be okay. Will you pray with me? God in heaven, thank you for these examples, for these broken and hurting people that you have used through history to teach us how much you love us, how you are there for us, and how at the end of it all, your love will prevail. Lord, as we follow you, the only way we know how, as we follow Jesus, as we worship him with our lives, as we give his love to the world through the way that we walk with our neighbor, we ask that you would continue to give us wisdom. Build up the wisdom we were born with. Help us learn from our experiences and give us supernatural gifts, spiritual gifts that will help us to live better, to show your love better, and to bring the gospel to our world better. We ask this in the name of the one who made us from birth, the one who redeemed us, and the Spirit that lives inside us. In Jesus' precious and holy name. And everybody agreed and said, Amen. Amen.